Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
There was a lot of racing this weekend. Welcome to the Turn 1 podcast. We're your host, Thomas.
And Jeremiah.
Jeremiah, we are going to dive into all the action this weekend. The race itself, which happened on Sunday, if you're confused at all still about the structure of the weekend, is going to take up the vast majority of the time. We're going to quickly run through the qualifying of the race, the sprint, shootout, and the sprint, and then we want to get into all the action that happened on race day. But before we get into any of that, we need to address the elephant in the room. We did our first ever race preview for the 2023 Austrian Grand Prix, and let's just say our predictions need a little work. Jeremiah, who did you have your podium winners as?
Well, for starters, I had Fernando Alonso winning the entire thing, and we know how that turned out. Second, I had Max. You know, I was kind of like understanding that Max was going to win the whole thing, so I wanted to have some fun by putting Fernando up in front. That was wrong. Clearly, I was way off on that. And third, my initial put was Lewis Hamilton, but after our discussions on how Lewis doesn't do well at this track, I went ahead and put George just kind of as a safe bet because that Mercedes is fast. So as you can tell, my 1, 2, and 3 are completely wrong in every aspect, as two of my people that I picked didn't even finish on the podium.
Yeah, Jeremiah goes 0 for 3 in his predictions, and it goes to show you can't let your want for some crazy drama to unfold play into your prediction making. Just wanting Fernando to beat Max, yeah. So looking over at mine, I had predicted Verstappen to win. Score, got that one. But then I had George Russell going second and Alonso going third. That did not happen. I think a lot of this, and we'll talk about the results, obviously, as we get into the race. We didn't know what the Ferrari was going to bring to the table, right? We talked about their upgrade package, but we had no idea what kind of results that was going to show on track. So that definitely played out. And then McLaren, Lando Norris for McLaren had a day, which just really threw a wrench into the battles that were happening in the top five. Because before it was just Red Bull and Aston Martin, or Red Bull and Mercedes, Aston Martin, Mercedes. Well, now you're throwing McLaren into the mix, right? You're throwing Ferrari into the mix. So it was a vastly different kind of racing slate throughout the day. Okay, let's look at the sprint stuff before we get into the race stuff. They did the race qualifying before the sprint race, but that kind of chronologically is confusing. So, Jeremiah, what do you have from the sprint shootout?
From the sprint shootout, not much. I did like watching Sergio Perez finally kind of put the car where it should be and get where he deserves to be in that second Red Bull. So that was cool to see. We did get to see the awesome pace coming out of that McLaren, which we're definitely going to get into on that. Mercedes didn't have the best look. Ferrari looked really strong. I think that was a reoccurring theme for the whole weekend, as their upgrade packages really did them wonders. As far as the sprint shootout, though, it's almost, besides like the Perez mishap and everything else, it's almost a carbon copy of the qualifying that we saw for the actual feature race. We saw Max running away with the whole thing. I think nobody had any questions about that. Ferrari standing strong. McLaren, more specifically Norris, with the only car with the upgrades, barely strong. Aston Martin not looking the strongest. But I think that's just, it's not a matter of them not being as good as they were. I think more competition has just been brought to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. You now have McLaren, or Norris's McLaren, entering the fight. The Ferraris are entering a fight, which is cool to see. And I'll say this is a theme throughout the weekend. The Haas car has short-term pace. The two Haas's in a few laps can be faster than 90% of the grid. It's just whenever you spread that out over like a 70-lap race, it kind of falls apart a little bit.
Yeah, and Gunther Steiner even mentioned this in the team principal conference. He kind of mentioned and kind of gave some of the secrets, I guess, if you want to even call them that. But I think it's pretty much obvious that Haas does not have race pace. Whenever it's in full race setup with the full gas and everything else, no in parfum, no changes being able to be made. The car is not quick, but we've seen what their one lap looks like. We've seen what their quality pace looks like. It's very strong. They're getting in the top 10 pretty regularly now at this point, which is weird to say coming from the Haas. Maybe not so much Kevin Magnussen. He doesn't necessarily have the same one shot as one lap as Hulkenberg does, but I would definitely say that not Max, geez. I would definitely say that K-Mag's got some better race pace than Hulkenberg just from being able to, one, stay in the race, and two, it doesn't look like he shreds those tires as much. So yeah, I think the Haas has some work to be done still.
So moving into Saturday afternoon, where we had the actual sprint race, the track was blanketed in some nice rain showers, and it made for quite the slippery track. The drivers all lined up on the grid, 19 drivers on the intermediates. Valtteri Bottas running the mediums. And you know what? I don't blame him. So he started in 19th, and I guess if you're going to try something, you might as well try it from 19th. You've got 24 laps to get into the top 8, right? Like, what are you going to do? So they do the formation lap. A bunch of drivers go wide at turn 1 and again at turn 3 because they're sliding all over the track. Bottas says, "Hey, this isn't the tire for me," goes back into the pits and throws on some inters. But then the race gets off, and honestly, the first turn was wild. I have Perez gets off well. He's in second on the inside line. Verstappen pushed him low into the wall. Perez actually took the lead out of that. They go wheel to wheel. And then finally at turn 3, which is the big one up the hill, they all slam on their brakes and there's a major pile up. Perez goes wide and then Verstappen regains the lead. And that's kind of where we settle throughout the day, although there is some mix-ups as we get into pit stops later on.
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit it on the mark. Not much changed after that. I did like to see a Red Bull battle up at the front. That was fun. The drivers did bring that up in the post-race presser. They were talking about how, there's no bad blood. They talked after the race. They got everything out in terms of what they were seeing, what Sergio was seeing versus what Max was seeing. They kind of aired out the differences. And then in the presser, they were talking about how, the media likes to make stories and stuff like that. And Max was like, so just please, no stories. Just understand that we were fine. We made up it. We had a conversation after it, just like humans are supposed to do when they communicate with each other. And so then he goes, or maybe you should do a press conference or maybe you should do an article and get some more, clicks on that article.
So the top 8 are all that matters for the sprint race because you have descending points 8 down to 1. And so really only the top 8 matters here. And you had some big winners and kind of some big losers from the sprint day. Obviously, Max and Sergio still go 1-2, so they retain their points. But down in third, we have some changes. Norris had qualied third for the sprint. He drops down to 9th, still figuring things out at McLaren. So you have Carlos Sainz gaining points, Lance Stroll gaining a ton of points. Alonso gaining several points. Did Esteban Ocon? Yeah, Esteban Ocon joins the party and gets some points when he started in 9th.
I wanted to give a shout out to George Russell here because it kind of seems like he has been really good at kind of guessing where that crossover point is going to be. It seems like in past races, he's always the first to jump off the intermediates back onto slicks, and he has great results when he does it. And we saw the same thing here. He might have been pretty much even for the first few seconds of the lap, or maybe even for the first come out lap as he warms up the tires and everything. But then he had a 4-second per lap pace on the rest of the field until everybody else started to pit. So George has always been good, kind of like a tire whisperer kind of thing when coming off of those intermediates. But I wanted to bring this up about Hulkenberg because of the George tire switch. Hulkenberg did come into pit and get on those slicks and started tearing up the field, climbing his way back up. That's how he got into 6th. Because if I'm not mistaken, he dropped back to like 12th or 11th or maybe 10th. Something
early on. He had lost a lot of spots early on.
So that was a great recovery drive for him.
And he actually finished with the fastest lap. Okay, moving over to the actual race. We'll just peek at qualifying results. I don't want to go into a ton of notes, as we'll quickly make this a 3-hour race recap, which at that point just go watch the race. Verstappen takes pole. The 2 Ferraris go 2 and 3. That was a huge qualifying for them. And because qualifying actually happened first in the race weekend, you're like, whoa, hello, Ferrari. Welcome back to the podium. Lando Norris goes 4th. So this was your introduction to Lando back to the top 5. Hamilton 5th. Stroll in 6th. Nice to see him finally get a result that we think he should be getting pretty consistently, that 6th spot in qualifying. Alonso 7th, Hulkenberg 8th, Gasly 10, 9, and then Alex Albon 10th in that Williams, which we've seen that pretty consistently from him throughout the season as well.
Albon's looking pretty impressive in that Williams. I'm liking that every single race that goes by. It almost seems like it's a guarantee him at least above 12th. If he's not fighting for 10th, if he's not fighting for 7th, then, I mean, he's in that top 12, it seems like, every single race. And that's a great thing to see whenever you're talking about a car that respectfully should be at the back of the grid. It kind of makes me wonder where Albon would be if he was given a seat that mattered, per se, one of the top seats. I would love to see him teamed up with somebody with a little bit more pace to see if we could really gauge where Alex Albon is.
I was looking up real quick what his contract is like, because it's almost like he's battling for a better seat, which I think he could get a better seat than the Williams seat right now.
Sure.
But it says that he's under a multi-year deal with Williams, and
that doesn't
that's
mean
kind
anything.
of vague. I know they can buy it out, but it looks like someone that's in their final year of their contract that's like, hey, look what I can do with this car. Think of what I could do with your car.
That's a good point. It's almost kind of like a, hey, look over here.
Okay, let's move into Sunday, our premier race, the Grand Prix Austria 2023. 70 laps, or 71 laps this year, I think, is what it was. This is the 36th running of the Austrian Grand Prix, the 19th at the Red Bull Ring. This does not include the COVID year when they ran the Austrian Grand Prix twice and called it the Styrian Grand Prix.
Yeah.
They actually said that the Red Bull Ring is now under contract with F1 to be on the calendar through 2030, which I'm pretty happy about that. We're seeing a lot of that recently. It's not like many tracks have been falling off, and I kind of like the tracks that they're running these days.
I did want to bring up one question just before we dive into this race, because we're going to bring this up a lot throughout this podcast. So I want to kind of start this off, get it in everybody's head. Why can't anybody drive around Austria?
So this will be covered extensively towards the end when we go over the results, which changed drastically if you stopped watching the race right when it ended. Turn 10 is a problem area for a lot of drivers, and I believe there was some chatter about how turn 10 actually used to have a gravel pit on the other side of it, and that forced drivers to stay within the track limits, but they've opened it up to now it's that big red, white, and red runoff area, and it's meant to mimic the Austrian flag, but that is now clean track surface that if you run off on, it doesn't affect you. So all the drivers push the limit as much as they can, whipping out of the turn of turn 9. There's a small straightaway, and then going into turn 10 before the start finish line happens. They just push it. And I don't think some of their cars can push it as much as they think they can push it. And I'm referring to Mercedes.
Yeah, I wanted to just bring that up just to kind of make sure that our viewers kind of understand why it was that we saw Sergio Perez starting in 15th. And the reason why is because in Quali 2, we saw 2 or 3 of his lap times get deleted from track limits just from hopping off the track. So I wanted to start by saying before the race even starts, we saw this as a problem. And it's been a problem in future races as well at this circuit. But more specifically, this year was just really bad from all the way from practice 1 all the way to the feature race on Sunday.
Looking back at our track, DRS zones account for 35% of the track, which is wild. There is high overtaking opportunities in Austria at turn 1, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, and 6. Like, there's a lot of places to make passes. We saw that a lot at turn 4 in the race. And then there was possible rain in the forecast, although that didn't really pan out as the race went on. Okay, right before the race, I wrote down some observations. Mercedes was holding a 5-point lead on Aston Martin, and we're now in a clear battle for second between Perez, Alonso, and Hamilton. I've throughout the season been under the impression that Alonso or Hamilton is going to scoop up that second spot, but Sergio could hold on to it. I mean, I'm that's definitely now being factored into my theories. Let's do the race start, which is going to be a little bit different this week. I get turn one. Jeremiah
Let's hear
watched
it,
turn
champ.
one and he said, you know what? There's not enough action in turn one for me, so I'm just not gonna. Said I'm not gonna handle this one. Okay, so we get off the line. Verstappen and Leclerc 1-2 have very, very clean starts. It was good to not see Max bogged down. Sainz in third was slightly delayed. There was a clear gap that opened up between Leclerc's 2 and Sainz in 3. He does cover off potential overtakes from 4, 5, and 6. So I almost wondered if Sainz bogged down. We didn't get to see the reaction times from him, so I'm not entirely sure. But 4, 5, and 6 behind Sainz were running 3 wide down the home straightaway, which is not that long going into turn 1 when you start in the middle of the straightaway. Into turn 1, Verstappen, Leclerc, and Sainz all clean, all single file on the inside line. Looked textbook. It was perfect. Hamilton runs a little wide, though, because Mr. Lando Norris is dive bombing that corner.
Hey.
You do what you got to do, I guess. So Norris going inside now forces Stroll in 6 to go even more inside, meaning you're on grass now. And there's some possible contact. I don't think that was ever addressed after that, so I think the contact wasn't there. But it did look like there was a slight little wiggle in the back end of Stroll. Stroll is now holding up all the other drivers. So everybody behind 6 now has to wait for Lance Stroll to complete this turn because he's essentially blocking the whole turn. He had to back out of his battle on Norris, so he's holding them all up. Mr. Fernando Alonso, who smartly took the outside line at turn 1, cleanly gets past his teammate and moves up the 1 spot. And then Perez is also pushed way outside. He's really one of the only ones that goes to the runoff area in turn 1 because of the pileup caused by Lance Stroll.
Yeah.
So coming out of turn 1, Verstappen, Leclerc, and Sainz all hold order. Hamilton and Norris are battling. Stroll still holds his 6th spot, but then everybody back behind Stroll is basically running 3, 4 wide up the hill to turn 3. Okay.
That's pretty good.
Thank you. So going up the hill from turn 1 into turn 3. Turn 2 is the slight little wiggle in the straightaway between 1 and 3. It's not really a turn. Verstappen took the inside line at turn 3. Leclerc breaks late. He was trying to make his pass and make it early, and they go wheel to wheel, him on the outside. Sainz in 3rd and Hamilton in 4th mimic that exact situation ahead of them. Sainz took the inside line, Hamilton braked late. So basically, Hamilton and Leclerc were trying to get their 1 spot early, right? They were trying to make that pass. Neither of them could pull it off, but that was definitely a good chance to do it. And then finally, Norris and Alonso, 5th and 6th, were battling. Norris took the outside line, which I don't think was a good move. He initially lost the spot to Alonso, but then regained it coming down the DRS straight, which wasn't a DRS straight at the moment. But man, seeing the top 6 battle like that in turn 3 was a good start to the race.
Yeah, I would like to see, I guess we kind of got him a wake-up call on where the Aston Martin lies in terms of the now coming up McLaren and with the very powerful Ferrari. I would like to see the Aston Martins battle the Ferrari off the line in a race where maybe they qualify right next to each other, because then I could get a better idea of which car is faster. It was hard to tell with that buffer between the two groups because it seemed like the Ferraris were a little bit higher up, and then there was a buffer in between where then you had the Aston Martins down here.
As they fly around turn 3, turn 4 is where they start to, it's not necessarily a hairpin, but it's almost 180-degree kind of round turn as they come around the Austrian track. Leclerc is back wheel to wheel with Verstappen. Verstappen goes inside. He holds the lead. Sainz is now right on Leclerc as they go around turn 4. And then the action kind of subsides and things spread out a little bit, and you could take a breath.
But not for too long, as then Yuki tries to go rally car racing.
Yuki goes rally car racing, breaks his wing. There's a safety car, and the race is neutralized at that point.
What a great first lap.
That was awesome. So the safety car runs until lap 4 when they restart. And lap 4, Nico Hülkenberg was up to 7th. He was now splitting the Aston Martins. And at that point, it's just a case of how can you hold on? You're not going to move up any from the Haas in 7th. You just have to hold 7th. So I was watching that throughout the day. Lap 5, Verstappen already had a 1.5-second lead on Leclerc, which means no DRS for Leclerc. But that does mean that him and Sainz could play a little DRS train with themselves and possibly hold that 2 and 3 spot.
Yeah.
Lap 7, here's where we start. Lando Norris to the team. Hey, go ahead and check Lewis Hamilton for track limits, please. And you're like, oh man, it's going to be a whole day of dumb track limit violations.
Yeah.
Also on lap 7, Perez and Russell, Perez 12, Russell 11 battling. That was kind of cool to see. The second drivers on the team battling it out to get in the top 10.
Lap 8, it's very obvious that Sainz is faster than Leclerc in this race. And it's something that bothered me throughout the entire race because you just kept seeing Carlos Sainz's time get closer and closer to Charles. So much so that the engineer came on and goes, let me know for pace. And Carlos comes on and goes, I think you can see it. I don't need to let you know.
But yeah, he was faster all day. And granted, as we got into the DRS zones, a DRS played into the pace a little bit. But even like Crofty and Brundle were saying, hey, just switch up the cars and see. Because if the pace is the same, then Charles will be running faster laps, right? And Ferrari just refuses to switch things up. And I don't understand why.
I think you just need to put the fastest car out in front, and then the car that maybe needs a little bit more help, they'll have the DRS chain behind them, and then they can sit there and just keep catching up and then keep catching up. Meanwhile, Sainz is putting the pressure on, and who knows, maybe possibly catching Max. Probably not, but you know.
So looking at lap 10, Perez goes for a pass on Russell and gets it. And this is where you start to see that the RB19, Red Bull's car this year, can move up the pack even when it's stuck in a DRS train with 5 other cars. That's crazy. Still faster than everybody.
Yeah, their DRS power is overpowered. They've talked about that a lot. The DRS, the amount of DRS that the Red Bull can get out of that RB19 in comparison to everything else is a massive help. Like they're so much faster on their DRS than anybody else has on their DRS system, minus I think maybe Haas, who also has a very, very powerful DRS.
This is also where we start to see that the McLaren upgrades for Norris's car are really paying off. He's not only qualified very well, but he's holding the top 5 positions, which is really good. He's still saying that Hamilton's going off the track, and it's being noted that all of Hamilton's lap times are being deleted.
Yeah, McLaren's engineers, like, every time Hamilton goes off, please report it. He's like, and he's going off everywhere. I'm not going to talk the whole race. I don't know what you want me to do.
Lap 13, Hamilton reports, this car is slow.
Yeah. Can you imagine being an engineer for one of the top teams and you're giving it everything you've got? Meanwhile, your driver comes on and goes, hey, this car sucks. Thanks, man.
Yeah. And you know what? I don't know why he couldn't adjust. Maybe there was really something wrong with the car, but he couldn't adjust. It was consistent. Every time he went around turn 10, he went off the track. So he gets the black and white flag, which basically means any car given a black and white flag, if you do what you did again, which was in this case all track limits based, you're getting a 5-second penalty, no questions asked. So basically Lewis has to now run 60 laps clean when he couldn't run a lap clean before. Lap 13 is also where Mr. Nico Hülkenberg loses power, smoke billows out of his Haas, and he goes off track, parks it, gets out, and his race is over.
Right after the pit, too.
Yeah, sorry, Nico. Okay, lap 14, Sainz comes on the radio again and says, hey, I'd like to pass Leclerc and battle Verstappen. And they say, no, it's okay. Hamilton asks, which corner is he cutting? I have no doubt in my mind Hamilton knew what corner he was cutting.
I think they all knew.
Yeah. Norris and Hamilton both pit on lap 14, locking in their 2-stop strategies. The Ferraris double stack a pit stop under the virtual safety car caused by Nico Hülkenberg, and they are both plus 4 seconds.
Yeah, 4.4 for Leclerc and 4.5 for Carlos Sainz. Oh my gosh.
Ferrari, that's not how you do it.
That's like how AlphaTauri pits. What are you doing?
Okay, lap 16, we go green flag. The order is Verstappen, Leclerc, Perez. Perez up to 15th, up to 3rd from 15th on lap 16.
I had a note here for the VSC ending because this is where things went from could be potentially a great day to worse for Aston Martin. So Lance Stroll they decide to pit the cars, but they don't pit them the first time that they pass the pit. They wait and go around again, and they say, if the VSC is still going, we're going to box. So the VSC is still up. They double stack. Fernando comes in. He gets away clean, gets out there, and as Lance Stroll enters, I think it goes back to green as he's pulling out. So that entire time that he's going at the pit lane speed, everybody's back to full speed. So now we have Fernando Alonso, who's just barely making it out of the pits. Everybody's green. They're passing him. And Lance Stroll just gets sucked into the abyss down to 15.
They copied Ferrari's strategy on waiting until that next lap rolled around to pit. And whose strategy do you never copy? Ferrari's.
It's so dumb.
Sainz comes on the radio complaining that he should have stayed out because he dropped from 3rd to 6th. There's the start of Ferrari's strategical woes. And then Hamilton is slapped with a 5-second penalty for track limits on lap 16. Lap 19, Yuki Tsunoda, 5-second penalty. Bottas still out there with his broken wing. Sainz in 5th, Hamilton in 4th, battling. So much so that at turn 4, which is the one after you come up the hill and go around turn 3, Sainz takes 4th from Lewis Hamilton.
Along with the fastest lap.
Lap 20, just one lap ahead. Also at turn 4, Sainz passes Perez. Carlos really likes turn 4.
He's cooking. I think he was mad about that whole pit.
Yeah, I think he was trying to fly up. And Perez was the only one up there on old tires. He didn't take a pit stop during the VSC, so that wasn't where his fight was. Okay, lap 22. Hamilton telling the team that Perez is going off the track. He's now trying to compensate for him going off the track. And Hamilton and Perez are battling for 4th, wheel to wheel.
I will say at this point, we see an amazing battle unfold down in like 15th, 16th, 17th. We see Alex Albon, Esteban Ocon, K-Mag, and Stroll battling it out back there in the back. And this is like, it's not like it's one person behind the other. And it's like, oh, when one person makes a move, then everybody else. No, there are 4 guys all battling each other. It's the craziest thing. I was infatuated with this fight for at least 2 or 3 laps until it slowly started to level out. But some great fighting going on in the back of the track or back of the field for this entire race, in my opinion.
It was the battle for 11th, and you had 11 through 14 all trying to get it. Okay, lap 23. I note that Stroll is down to 12th at this point, so we're trying to see where he can work his way back up in the pack. Piastri hits Kevin Magnussen due to Lance Stroll's poor braking in a turn. And then Hamilton's still complaining about Sergio Perez and his track limits.
Lap 25, Ferrari go 1-2.
Oh, well, because Verstappen pit. What? Okay, I made the note.
But this is the first lap in 249 race laps that Verstappen hasn't led the race.
I took the note, and it's important. He's going to do it again. He'll now do it for the rest of the season and have 500 consecutive laps, wire to wire. So yeah, Verstappen.
The first time in like 3 races that we've seen somebody else besides Max leading.
For the first time all year, Verstappen pits not having a pit window built up behind him. And he loses his 249 consecutive laps ledge streak, which is crazy. But again, it's all pit stop based. Okay, lap 28. McLaren's pace is apparent as Norris easily passes Lewis Hamilton for 4th.
Yes. I've been waiting for this moment all season.
Okay.
First of all, we started off this season talking about you specifically mentioning that McLaren weren't going to do anything all season long. And I was like,
they're still not.
I was like, hey, man, they'll get there. Give them time. And here they are.
Okay, lap 31, Charles Leclerc is asked about a 3-stop strategy, to which he just responds with, no. Not doing that. Lap 33, I was trying to keep track of all the black and white flags, and on lap 33, I gave up and I just said, so many black and white flags, because there was a lot. Flashing back real quick to lap 31, it's noted that Verstappen will be in striking distance of Leclerc in 3 laps. On lap 34, 3 laps later, Verstappen is attempting overtakes on Leclerc, which it still impresses me. And then finally, lap 35, 1 lap after predicted, Verstappen takes the overtake in turn 3. He was not going for the overtake. He backed out of it, but he backs out of it to ensure that he gets DRS. And not only did he get DRS, he had the lead with DRS.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were going to mention that, because that was a genius move by Verstappen as he waits to cross that line making sure that he's behind Leclerc. I mean, is absolutely genius. Elsewhere, De Vries is showing some of that Dutch fire as he shoves K-Mag off the track.
Sorry, K-Mag. He's been bumped by everybody today in
I
this race.
know.
Lap 39, Hamilton says, hey, has everybody else got some penalties? And Toto comes on. Always not good when you hear Toto come on the radio.
I have the exact quote here. Do you have it?
Read it. No, read it.
Okay. So he comes on and he complains about the about the penalties, and Toto comes on and goes, Lewis, they're all going to get penalties in front of you, all of them. So keep going. Which he was wrong.
A lot of the people behind him got penalties. It's like in baseball, how hitters couldn't adjust to the shift and they couldn't adjust to this or that. Apparently, you can't adjust to a turn on a track. I don't know.
Well, it wasn't just that. It's that once it got into his mind, it was like a cancer. He couldn't get it out. It felt like every 5 laps we were hearing from him regarding the penalties, and it felt like the rest of the time he was doing nothing but watching drivers go through turns 9 and 10, just making sure everybody's getting their penalties. And at that point, it becomes like, I don't know. It kind of feels icky. Like, I want it to just be pure racing. Like, who cares? Yes, you got a penalty. Deal with it. Move on.
In hindsight, they should have told him to not get any more penalties because, as we'll cover at the end of the race, it negatively affected him. That mindset of, oh, everybody else is getting penalties. Cool.
Right.
Lap 47, you have a classic Lando Norris versus Carlos Sainz going at it. Sainz overtakes Norris. Well, actually, let me go back to lap 46. Sainz pits and loses 4th place to Norris.
Yes.
Then going into lap 47, Norris and Sainz are battling. Sainz overtakes Norris for 4th in turn 4. Sainz's favorite place to overtake. This is his 4th pass there of the day. Norris hangs on behind him through turns 5 and 6. And then finally coming around to turn 7, Sainz solidifies that he is holding on to 4th. Okay, lap 49, Norris staying within 1 second of Sainz. That again just goes back to showing that McLaren they've got pace now. The fact that you can keep up with a Ferrari is a really good sign from where they started the season.
What? And the fact that the majority of the track is all just one big DRS zone.
Yeah, that might help. Lap 50, this is key. Verstappen stops the second time for mediums. Keep that in mind. This is his second stop of the race. So he's done, right, with his pit stops. He comes out, obviously, in the lead of the race, but he's in heavy traffic because he's currently running behind 13th place. That's how far up the pack he's gotten. Okay, on lap 51, your top 5 is Verstappen, Leclerc, Sainz, Norris, and Perez. Quite a mix that I don't think either of us could have predicted because obviously we didn't predict this top 5. Lap 52, Hamilton comes on the radio and says, hey, why are these penalties that you talked about not just being dished out left and right? And Toto just says, we know the car is bad.
Yeah, the exact quote, because I had to make sure I wrote down these word for word because the way that Toto delivers things is so poetic. He goes, Lewis, the car is bad. We know. Please drive it.
Lap 55, the team radios down to Sergio, who at this point has 0 penalties, 0 black and white flags, all that good stuff. And they say, hey, avoid all track limits issues. We cannot take a penalty here. That is key. And there are several teams that radio to their drivers without penalties, i.e. Lando Norris's team, that make a very big decision there to say, hey, look, whatever you do, drive clean, because those 5-10 second penalties will hurt more than losing 0.1 on a turn, right?
Right.
Okay, lap 56, Norris locks up and runs wide. Perez takes advantage of that, who is now battling him, and passes Norris for 4th, and Perez is now chasing down Carlos Sainz for 3rd.
And this was where we kind of see one of the most fun, in my opinion, battles for this entire race, and that's the Perez versus Sainz battle. This battle, those two were going after it. Neither wanting to lose their spot. Carlos was battling for the 3rd on the podium spot, or no, third.
Yeah, he was for 3rd.
Yeah, so they were going with the Ferrari 2-3, and Checo was giving it everything he could to put 2 Red Bulls on that podium, and that battle was so intense.
So on lap 59, Perez attempts an overtake at turn 3. He does a quick right-left little whip, goes to the outside line. They barely miss each other coming into that turn. Sainz holds on to 3rd. Sainz does, however, get DRS, though, because Perez 2 laps in a row, kept just inching out Carlos Sainz before the DRS detection zone, but then losing him in the turn. And so Carlos would hold the lead with DRS, which did not help Sergio.
This bothered me to no end because we watched Max quite literally 20 laps prior passing Leclerc with that strategy. And here Perez is on the same team, same car, not able to get the move done. And he keeps making that same small mistake, giving Sainz the DRS on that back straight. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Take some notes from Max.
Even the commentators were like, the team needs to tell him to stop doing that.
But I think this is where we kind of see the tiers, right? So we have the Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, and Max Verstappen tier, and then maybe the Carlos Sainz and Checo Perez, Valtteri Bottas kind of tier that might be right under the greats. But this is where we see the tiers, because in knowledge wise, Max knew off the rip what he wanted to do to get that pass done. Checo, it took him a couple tries, a couple stabs at it, and then finally figures it out.
So that was lap 59 was his first attempt. And again, on every turn where there's a DRS zone, he was inching ahead and he lost out on DRS. Lap 60 repeats lap 59, like almost identically. And then finally on lap 61, Perez gets DRS and makes the pass. That's all he needed was one DRS zone to pass Carlos.
He just kept flying over that detection zone with the lead. I'm like, what are you doing, dude?
Okay, lap 69. This is fun. The team radios to Mr. Max Verstappen, your race leader, by a cool 23, 24 seconds, depending on where he is on the track, and says, hey, Max, let's go ahead and start to cool those tires, bud. And he says, no, I'd like to box.
Meanwhile, later that lap, box.
So if you're not aware of what he was looking to do in this situation, you're like, why is he's already pit twice. He could easily end the race. There's 2 laps left. He wants a point that he currently does not have, which is the fastest lap point. And he knows how good Red Bull is a team. And he knows that with a 24-second lead, he can easily pit, have plenty of time to come out, warm up the tires, all that, and have a flyer, a heater of a last lap.
I think if there was any small clip that I would like to see on repeat for the rest of the season as kind of like the benchmark for how the season went, it's probably Charles in second, giving it everything that he's got, and Max coming out of the pits and just zipping from one side to the track of the track to the other, warming up his tires. I'm like, oh my gosh, if that doesn't spell out how Ferrari just have not been able to get it done compared to Red Bull this year.
No, so Max came out with a 4 or 5 second lead on Leclerc, but again, he treats it like a formation lap. He's weaving the tires, he's getting heat into him. So by the time Max starts his hot lap, Leclerc is only down by like 1.92 seconds, something like that. So he made up 3 or 4 seconds on Verstappen, but then Verstappen goes flying and ends up finishing the race with a 5.1 second lead on Leclerc. In a matter of 68 something seconds, he gets 5 seconds on him. So lap 71, Verstappen wins. He also gets the fastest lap. There's orange smoke everywhere, and Lando Norris secures driver of the day honors from, at the time, 5th place.
Okay, so I wanted to bring this back up because the McLarens, we did not talk about them enough. And I know we saved our thoughts for how the race actually went for after the race for this specific reason. You know what? Before we talk about that, actually, why don't we run through the penalties? You wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, so I had notes on like the cool down room and all that, but it's not relevant to these. The penalties are here where we get crazy. So your finishing order, not your points order and all that, the finishing order of how guys cross the start finish line is as follows: Verstappen, Leclerc, Perez, Sainz, Norris, Alonso, Hamilton, Russell, Stroll. That is not how the race actually finished, though, in terms of point standings. The actual results were Verstappen, Leclerc, Perez, Norris, Alonso, Sainz, Russell, Hamilton, Stroll, Gasly. And we'll put a graphic on the screen. Lando Norris gains a spot, Alonso gains a spot, Carlos loses 2 spots, George gains a spot, Hamilton loses a spot, Stroll gets a spot, and Gasly loses a spot. If you finish watching the race, you watch the cool down room, you watch the podium celebration, all that, you would have had no idea that this happened. you knew about the penalties in race, right? Like 6 or 7 drivers got in race penalties, 5 or 10 seconds, depending on their track limit violations or if they served the penalties correctly or not. But post race, they come down with the following penalties. These are all 10 seconds unless otherwise noted. Sainz, Hamilton, Gasly, Albon, Sargent all get 10-second penalties. Ocon gets 35 seconds of penalties, and
Oh
Yuki Tsunoda gets
no.
5. Nick DeVries gets 15. So after the race, the stewards basically said, hey, we had a lot of action happening on track that we weren't able to catch in real time. So they went back through and reviewed the track limits violations and said, hey, we missed these, handing these out during the race. Here's your penalties.
I get where they're coming from. It's their job. They're paid to do that. That's specifically what that job is designed to do. So I guess the problem should lie more in the track itself. I mean, they've got to do something about turns 9 and 10.
As you read the official FIA document, which I'll put a screenshot of that up on the screen as well, they list how the penalties have been applied, and then they say, the stewards very strongly recommend that a solution be found to the track limit situation at this circuit. Basically saying, hey, look, our job as stewards is to apply the rules as we read them. So we're doing that, but this is a problem. Basically, we don't want to do this again next year, so fix your track.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure the FIA stewards want to watch a fun race and have some. They don't want to sit there. Oh, I got to work today. Come on.
So in total, Hamilton had during the entire race, Hamilton had 15 seconds of penalties. Sainz had 15-second penalties. Ocon had 35 seconds of penalties.
Jeez.
I mean, so it changed the results drastically. Carlos Sainz goes from 4 to 6, especially when he had a really good day.
But for people like Carlos Sainz, who's going to lose two places, that's going to hurt a lot. George Russell getting that spot over Hamilton, I'm sure that's going to mess with Hamilton's head a little bit. Hopefully not. But we definitely see like Fernando Alonso jumping all the way up to 5th. Lando Norris getting a 4th place finish because of this. Like the order is just all over the place here.
The last thing I want to cover before we look at standings is just in the cool down room, like I mentioned. I am blown away by the driver's knowledge, and I know it constantly impresses us. But the fact that like Leclerc and Verstappen and Perez are sitting there, and they're all referring to each other's races and the lap number and what was happening. Like, how does Max Verstappen know what Charles Leclerc is doing on lap 21, which was an hour and a half ago at this point?
I mean, let's be honest. He's watching the Jumbotron the entire race at this point.
But how does Leclerc know what Perez is doing the whole? Like, they all know what every single car is doing on every single lap of the race, and I'm blown away by that.
Yeah, that's definitely it's just one of those things where I guess if you do it for your entire life, you kind of live at that speed. So when you're going that speed, it's almost like everything happens in a way that you can fully understand it. And then it just sticks because when that adrenaline's pumping, I guess, I don't know, the moments matter more. And when moments are bigger like that, they tend to stick in your memory a lot better. So they're able to kind of recall it and talk about it after the race. But that's still insane. Like, could you imagine imagine if we went go-karting for 71 laps, and that's just go-karting. And then at the end of it, I was like, dude, that move you made on turn 2 of lap 35 was sweet.
I wouldn't have remembered the last 3 laps. Like, that's all I would have. I wouldn't have known anything else. So we gave the race order, and like I said, I'll put on the screen the standings for the season. Verstappen way out in the lead, 229 points. Perez holding solid still at second, which is I enjoy Perez holding second, and I don't mean to discount his run. He's been pretty inconsistent of late, and so it's tough to see him holding that for the season. Alonso 3rd, Hamilton 4th, Sainz 5th, Leclerc 6th. The constructors, Red Bull, obviously way out in the lead with 377 points. Mercedes now a 3-point lead on Aston Martin over their 5-point lead to start the day.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
that's all Fernando Alonso, but I'll take that.
Okay. That was all that I had for the Grand Prix weekend. You got anything else?
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts just as I went and I did this race, watching it multiple times. I kind of, anytime that I had a thought that popped into my head, I would write it down. So I wanted to take a moment to kind of address some of these now that we've done with the actual race recap and everything else, just to kind of get it out there. We need to talk about Ferrari bringing an insane package. I don't know what this is going to turn out for the rest of the season, or what did you say their standings were in the constructors in comparison to Mercedes and Aston Martin?
Ferrari is fourth. They are at 154 points. Aston Martin has 175, Mercedes 178.
I think if Ferrari can hold form, there's a good chance that they take second in the constructors. They're not, Mercedes and Aston Martin are not that far ahead.
I think we need to see next week's race, which is going to be Silverstone.
Yeah.
And because we know Ferrari is just good at Austria, right? It's a pretty straight line track. There's not a lot of turns. And so I want to see a track that is a little more windy, whips the car around a little bit more.
Lewis specialty, if you will.
Yeah, and see if that Ferrari holds that pace or if that was just a one-off for Austria.
Number 2, McLaren are quick. I would like to see Oscar Piastri in that car, and I can't wait until they can bring the upgrades to Oscar because I want to see where he falls in this. Are we going to get another Lance Stroll situation here, or is this going to be more closer to a George Russell kind of thing, or is this going to be closer to a Carlos Sainz kind of thing where he's right on the gearbox of his teammate the entire season? Like, I want to know where Oscar lines up with Lando Norris with the front runners.
We've seen some flashes of good stuff from him this year, just not. And I attribute this mostly to McLaren's kind of issues to start the season, but we just haven't seen what we thought we would see out of him. Right? Like we thought he'd be top 10 finisher every single race, and we're not seeing that.
But we thought McLaren would be.
Right.
They haven't been able to get it done. A couple other notes. AlphaTauri, I've kind of been keeping track with this. I didn't say anything last week, but I'm going to say it this week. They're looking weak. I don't know what's going on there. That is not looking strong. And of course, the second half of that is De Vries, and he hasn't looked strong all season. I understand that. But Yuki Tsunoda did not look good last race or this race, and it's kind of upsetting me. Not in like a you should be doing better kind of thing, but I had so much promise from like coming from him in terms of like the way that I would look at him. I mean, every driver talks about him being insanely fast. So to see AlphaTauri finishing as low as they did, with Yuki specifically finishing 19th, that hurts.
He needs to do what Alex Albon is doing. He needs to be finishing 11th through 9th, right, in qualifying and races and all that. And we're not seeing it. He's not outperforming his car, which if you want a long-term race seat at a big name team, you need to outperform your car. And he is not outperforming the AlphaTauri. He currently has 2 points. Nick De Vries has 0. I think AlphaTauri they didn't build a good car and they didn't do a good job with the driver lineup this year.
That's unfortunate to say, especially when you're talking about a previous F2 champion and Formula E champion.
And I don't think either of those drivers are on track to be a Red Bull driver right now.
No. Mm-mm.
It could be Yuki. It could be Yuki, just not.
It could
not
be
now.
Yuki. We'd have to see what happens with that second seat, because I don't even think that if it opened up right now that he would even go to Yuki.
No, they'd get somebody else.
No, exactly. The last point that I wanted to bring before we end this show is I wanted to talk about Perez, because Perez had another amazing recovery drive as he climbed all the way back up from 15th to take home a podium spot. That's an impressive drive. I don't care who you are. My problem is, why does he keep having so many recovery drives? Why does he keep getting in that position to where he has to have a recovery drive?
It's something that we saw 2 seasons ago where they were contemplating replacing Sergio, and they obviously didn't, and I think that was a good move. But he has these flashes of greatness, like when he's on a city circuit or something like that, and then he goes in these streaks of I can't qualify well, and then I work my way up in the race, and then I don't race well, and he's still a really, really good second driver. Like I don't think there's anybody better than him as a second driver for Red Bull right now that's out in the F1 grid. But consistency, like we talked about with the Ferraris and with Lance Stroll, consistency matters.
And the thing is you can attribute it right now to him being sick, but the fact of the matter is that he did better on this recovery drive being sick than he has in the past being fully healthy. So this isn't like a new thing. This is a reoccurring trend.
He went from 15th to 3rd in 15 laps. Now, granted, he didn't pit when a lot of other people did,
Sure.
But still.
He didn't have to pit.
No.
That's the beauty of the Red Bull.
Okay, that is it for the 2023 Austrian Grand Prix. If you have any thoughts or comments, let us know in the comment section down below. Otherwise, we'll see you. Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.